Okay, looks like we are live on Facebook. Hello, hello, IC Healers. It is Dr. LaGreca here, and I am here with a very, very good colleague of mine, Brendan Dean Beremeyer with FDN, and we are going to have a conversation today that is really important for you to hear. And this one is on a topic that a lot of people are very confused about. It is mold. Mold, mycotoxins, fungus all around us. It's everywhere. What are we going to do about it? So that's what we're going to talk about. And so I want to do a quick introduction here. Brendan is a functional medicine consultant, and he's board certified holistic health practitioner, master nutrition coach, master personal trainer, which makes him very unique because he has that fitness background as I do myself, which I think is a very great combination. He's USAW sports performance coach and Crossfit certified trainer. Now, he began his career as a personal trainer and nutrition coach as myself, but he started at age 19. Actually, I was 19 too when I started getting interested in fitness. But he has his own little history here. Is medically discharged from the Navy SEAL training pipeline, and he had an injury, and he was exposed to a bunch of functional lab tests in the beginning of his career, and that's really what pursued him to continuing on. And now he's the metabolic health and holistic education coach. Like, he does a lot of education with practitioners like myself. So basically how I know Brendan is he educates practitioners like myself. I've taken his organic acid training. So you guys remember I talked about that organic acid training I was working on. That was his. So he was teaching us about that. He's really, really, really a genius when it comes to understanding biochemical pathways, which are really important component to nutrition. A lot of practitioners and health coaches don't understand biochemistry. And that if you don't understand it, you're missing a huge piece of healing and teaching people how to heal, because biochemistry is everything. Your metabolism and all your immune system, it's all biochemistry. So that's kind of how I know him. And he is great on fitness. I mean, you can tell he's really fit. So he likes to work out during his free time, and he enjoys nature. And I just know that you're just a natural gifted educator, Brendan.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate all that. That was very endearing.
You're welcome. No, I really mean that. So I'm going to let him take the floor here and introduce himself a little bit more and tell us more, if he, about what he knows. And then we're going to dive right into mold.
Absolutely. I appreciate that intro. And, it's kind of fun for me because especially with the background in fitness and nutrition, I would have never thought mold, would be such a big part of my professional life. But as any of us, professional healers and functional professionals understand, it really is going through your own health struggles and your own health crisis. That always is going to inspire your professional path. And so I'm very passionate about mental health and metabolic health and just all the myriad of root cause, stressors that might be moving us away from health, moving us closer to disease. And mold is a big one, and it's very often overlooked. I think it's perhaps one of the more detrimental of things that we can run into that can just totally cripple our health. And I just don't see a lot of awareness out there about it. It's kind of just now becoming popular in our industry. And so with that, I think the functional medicine industry is kind of better at creating problems than solving them sometimes. And so I really like to deliver and teach this information in an understandable, empowering way that is not inducing, fear and orthorexia and neurotic behavior, because I think we have to put it into context. And like you said, fungus all around us. Fungi is everywhere. It's such a crucial part of the ecosystem. It's a crucial part of our microbiome. So it's not a matter of, have you been exposed to mold? It's how much, when, how resilient is your body against it? And for some people, whether it's they're super stressed and that's lowering their immune system, and their fungi in their GI tract starts getting a little provocated, or they have some water damage to their home and they don't know it, or they don't realize how detrimental that can be. But when you start looking at the broad implications of what mold can do to your health, I think it's a subject that really does need to kind of be elucidated and explained. So I'm really grateful for the opportunity to discuss it with you today.
Thank you. And I like how you said, with the immune system and how that's kind of that is really key. And when I was having my meeting with Carly and we're talking about Lyme, it's interesting because, we both said, everyone's been exposed to it at some point in their life. And it doesn't have to be that tick bite. We know you can get it through intercourse and through utero and all that. And so we all have microbes. I mean, in fact, I have to always tell my clients, because a lot of people are in the kill, kill, kill mentality, a lot of practitioners too. And I say to them, you're never going to win that war because they've been here before you and they will be here after you. So they've evolved with us. We have to learn to live with them. And that's your immune system, isn't it?
Absolutely. I literally was just writing on Instagram a lot recently, especially with some of the events in the world today. Our healthcare system is 100% this germ theory. Microbes they don't even think of it as microbes as being our friends or health building. It's, microbes equals infectious disease, which is, as we're understanding now with all of our new microbiome research and understanding, no, microbes are life. There is nothing about the human body that's sterile. We have bacteria flowing through our veins. We have fungi that holds our brain together. So microbes are not the enemy. And it is that balance of our good microbes that give us, good immunity. And that's obviously why current events in the world are so all over the place. And, America is struggling so much in the current crisis because we're at war with microbes that are the very thing that gave us life to begin with.
Exactly. We have more bacterial DNA, I read somewhere, than we have our own.
Absolutely. More bacterial cells than human cells too.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. See, that's a really good point. So, well, that leads us to the first question. Let's talk about the word mycotoxin, because there's mycotoxin and there's mold. Can you explain the difference?
Absolutely. So mycotoxin, so myco really just referring to fungi. And of course, with the fungi kingdom, we have yeast and then mold, just two different classifications of fungi. But myco is just referring to fungi, and then toxin. So when we're talking about mycotoxins, we're talking about the toxins that the mold and the fungi actually produces, which is really just a defense mechanism for the mold. The biological theory is that, hey, let's say there's some rotting debris in the forest, and you have two competitive mold species kind of moving in to gobble up that food that is, the rotting wood or whatever it is, foliage. Okay, well, those the mold has to have some sort of attack mechanism, defense mechanism, and so it uses mycotoxins to basically gas each other to compete for that resource that is the food. But yeah, these mycotoxins are extremely poisonous to the human body. We've studied them for biological warfare, and we actually use some of these mycotoxins as pharmaceutical drugs, such as statin medications are derived from mycotoxins, which inhibit cholesterol production. And we also use mycotoxins as immunosuppressants to suppress the immune system for certain situations. So they're very, very potent.
Is penicillin from mold too?
Yeah, penicillin, first antibiotic, was derived from Penicillium, one of the major toxigenic molds. So absolutely. And that's why I think it's a little ridiculous where, many conventional medical doctors, when they hear mold illness or mycotoxicosis, they'll kind of roll their eyes and laugh and say, that's not a real thing. It's like, well, you prescribe these mycotoxin derived drugs every day, but you're saying that, if I just ate moldy food or was living in a water damaged building, that couldn't affect my health. It just makes no sense.
That's interesting. I didn't even think about that. Could somebody develop mold illness from overuse of antibiotics like penicillin?
Probably not, but anciently they used to, our primordial ancestors would use mold and rub it on an open wound to prevent infection. So I love microbes because you really can use microbes to combat microbes, and use nature to correct nature. And a lot of our early pharmaceutical drugs were derived from either bacteria or mold or the secondary metabolites that these microbes are producing.
That's a really good point. So they're not always harmful. Yeah, I know.
They can be used strategically. Yeah.
Can be used strategically. I like that. So brings me to the next question then. When are they harmful, and why are they harmful when they are?
Yeah, so, gosh, I think that was in the 1800s over in Europe. There was this incident called St. Anthony's Fire, where this population in Europe was basically poisoned because they were eating grains that were contaminated by this fungus called ergot. And so, whether it's ergot or aspergillus or any of these species of molds, they produce these different alkaloids, these different mycotoxins that, yeah, are horribly toxic. We're not supposed to ingest that or live around it. And so, we have to be careful about, we don't want to create a problem where there is not a problem. So we don't want to freak people out about mold. But, if we look at mycotoxin contaminated food, or the more problematic situations are a water damaged building, or it doesn't have to be food exposure or environmental exposure. But like I alluded to before, everybody has some degree of mold growing inside them all the time. That's just part of our ecology and our microbiome. So, if you're just metabolically unhealthy, which 88% of the American population is, or, we know that stress suppresses the immune system. So sometimes it's that opportunistic growth of the fungus inside of us. And, then it's like, okay, if the mold or the candida or whatever fungi it is overgrowing in your body, well, as it proliferates, it's producing more toxins within you and kind of poisoning you from the inside out.
Ah, that's like candida. Same
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah, very, very similar. And there's even, some theory about, can candida produce a toxin called gliotoxin? And, if you have maybe an overgrowth of both, like you have some aspergillus in there and some candida, are they maybe having a little bit of a turf war inside of you? So,
Or a party.
yeah, or a party. That's a good way to look at it too. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, maybe they're eating the same food.
Yeah, they're just hanging out, making friends, creating their biofilm bubble to party in.
So, you just mentioned opportunistic infection. So, in what situations would somebody be in that? You said stress. What other things would maybe promote opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, I think stress is probably the biggest factor that our population faces, just because we're all so high speed, sympathetic, go, 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 stressed out. But I would say the other big one is just the chronic antibiotic use. And like, again, because of our kind of germ theory, that is our healthcare model of microbes equals infections and infectious disease. We give out antibiotics and antifungal drugs, but more so the antibiotics, like Halloween candy. And so it's like when we just decimate and wipe out our good flora, it absolutely opens the door for some of these more opportunistic or pathogenic organisms to start proliferating. So, you put a few other, hidden stressors on top of that, it just creates the perfect environment for, whether it, again, candida as a yeast or aspergillus or penicillium as a mold, to really start taking over, because we don't have enough of those good bacteria to keep that garden of life in check. And that's where, when I'm, whether it's a practitioner or a client, I'm always educating of, hey, gut health is a lifestyle, not a protocol. And it's no different than having a healthy garden in your backyard. You have to clear out that debris and make sure there's not excess moisture, or yeah, the fungus will start, eating your plants and or your crops or whatever it is. So really no different. It's just inside of us.
Also, antibiotics in our food too. Would that also influence?
Yeah, it really freaks me out with that. If you think about all of our all of our meats and whatnot that might be pumped full of antibiotics, and we're consuming that on top of whatever we're being prescribed. And then, the contaminated food, or like grains being probably the top contaminated food source for mold or mycotoxins. And look how grain heavy the American diet is. So we really have kind of created the perfect diet and lifestyle to facilitate and promote, these overgrowths of, whether it's dysbiotic bacteria or fungus.
So that's a really good point. I just did a little experiment myself with my dog. We have a dog that's had dysbiosis and I think colitis for a while there. My fiance likes to treat him with grain-fed, non-antibiotic beef, and it actually causes him to have diarrhea. And I said, okay, we got these two new puppies and I'm putting them on organic food because I cook for my puppies. And I was like, let's just try putting the older dog on the same food. So we did the grass-fed antibiotic-free meats, and I've been putting vegetables that I've been blending in the food processor with some, quinoa, and honestly, the older dog's stools are coming out perfectly now, as shaped and perfectly formed. So that was my little experiment. And I confirmed what you just said, that grain-fed beef is toxic to our dog's gut.
Yeah, the thing with especially mycotoxins, you really can't process those out very easily at all. There's some new technology coming out to, we have mycotoxin tested, coffee and whatever, but mycotoxins really can't be cooked out or processed out. So you could very well have, whatever kind of livestock and being fed grains that might be contaminated. And that will pass through, then it gets chalked up in the tissue of the animal that then we're eating. So there is that kind of secondary exposure through the livestock as well.
So then you're saying that if an animal consumes a mycotoxin, it goes through their metabolism and we eat the flesh. We are not eating the mold, but we're actually eating the mycotoxin.
Yeah,
Possible?
absolutely. The agricultural industry is astute to mold and mycotoxins way more than conventional healthcare. There is food additive that different farmers and agricultural industry workers, they buy and add this additive to the food of their livestock to help break down mycotoxins in the livestock's body. We really need something like that for medical purposes, but we're not there yet. But absolutely, those mycotoxins that, let's say, the pig or the bovine or the chicken or whatever might be eating, you're not really going to be eating like live, fungal cultures, or probably not even mold spores, but the toxins themselves will get sequestered in the animal tissue, which then we're eating, especially the fattier stuff.
Wow. Okay. Can you explain that fat connection?
Yeah, so mycotoxins they seem to be ionospheric, which means they're hydrophilic and lipophilic, but they seem to predominantly get stored in adipose and fat tissue, just like a lot of other toxins. Kind of this, we pack away those toxins into the fat cells so they're not causing havoc in our bodies. So especially like you think about grain-fed cows and you're eating a really fatty steak or something, that could potentially be mycotoxin contaminated. But there's not any great way of knowing that. And that's where I think if we can, move towards as much organic or, grass-fed and just the healthier cuts of meat, because we don't want to freak ourselves out too much, because some mycotoxin consumption is kind of just part of being human. So we don't want to go overboard with it, but it is good to know about for sure.
So if somebody is overweight, then it's a good strategy to lose weight because you're storing some of the mycotoxins in your fat cells. And
Absolutely.
you may have die-off reactions or when you're losing weight.
Yeah. Yeah, I think any kind of, weight loss program needs to also be a detox program, and vice versa. I mean, to lose weight, you need detox. To detox, you need to lose weight, because yeah, a lot of our toxins are packed up in our fat cells.
Interesting. Okay. So symptoms. Oh no, let's get into. You had mentioned food sources, and so common food besides grains. Are there other foods that are sources of mycotoxin exposure?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, grains are going to be probably the biggest one. So
And go
just,
ahead and name some of the grains, just so people know where.
wheat, barley, rye. So it's like you think about all those gluten-containing grains. So it's like the gluten, the glyphosate, mycotoxins, just kind of this stew. So really, any kind of grain. It doesn't have to be a gluten-containing grain. But you think about they harvest grains and then put that grain in a big silo on the farm. They're stripping the grain out of the environment where there might have been fungus growing or whatever. But then they pack it away into this hot, humid, confined space that is hot, humid, and full of carbohydrates, which is the perfect environment for fungus to grow. So I really do. I worry a little bit about those grain silos just festering with mold and fungi that then gets produced into a McDonald's cheeseburger bun or something like
Yeah.
that. But outside of grains, I mean, it can be different types of oils potentially. If it's like a safflower, canola oil, and
Peanut.
maybe there's yeah, fungus growing on that. Peanuts are a big one, or some different nuts, dried fruit, coffee. For
Dried
some
fruit.
reason,
Wow.
apple juice.
Yeah.
Apple juice is pretty commonly contaminated. Dog food, all pretty much all dog food is contaminated. So
Probably don't. I don't give them
yeah,
these. Yeah.
I'm inclined to believe that dogs and maybe some of these other like grain consuming herbivores, I'm inclined to believe they probably have more robust detoxification mechanisms in their gut to more adequately process some of this out, but it's still there.
Not our dog. His eyes are like red. I could tell when he's inflamed. His eyes get red.
Poor puppy.
Yeah, no, that's why when the puppies came around the brand, I'm like, we're not doing that. So
Yeah.
I cook for them. It's a lot of work, but it's more.
Yeah. Yeah, dogs probably should be eating the same stuff we are, unless we're eating, garbage processed food, in which case we both dog and human need to step it up.
Yeah, I mean, they're like part of the family. So
Yeah.
like going back to the food, so peanuts are interesting because when I did my organic acid test, which we're going to talk about in a moment, I found out that I had a lot of aspergillus in my gut too. And I haven't been around water damaged buildings as far as I know. And I know that when I was in my college years, I used to binge eat on peanut butter. Is it true that if you have microbes in your gut, such as mold, you actually crave the food? I would crave more peanut butter because I had this uncontrollable craving for peanut butter. I used to come back from drinking in my college years, and I would sit there and eat peanut butter by the spoon. I almost wonder if the peanuts were the source of my mycotoxins in my gut from all those years.
I think there's a lot that we could learn about that. We don't really have any solid evidence of. Now, I do think something like, oh, okay, so fungus really feeds on carbohydrates. So, if we have candida overgrowth, we might really crave sugary
Yeah,
foods. And I think that's a little more valid. But at the same time, the more that we learn about microbes and how they impact every aspect of our physiology, I wouldn't at all be surprised if there's something to that of, the microbes are kind of driving us to consume something that's in
with
their
the
interest,
brain. Yeah, in their
Yeah.
yeah. So with going back to then the sources. So how if somebody is it possible that someone could be exposed to mold in their house and not know it? That's the question I have.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I would say most people don't know it in general. And that's it's a tricky thing because certainly our modern day pseudo caves that we live in, I mean, it's perfect. It's the perfect environment and material for mold to grow. Drywall and all the pine wood and everything. Now, certainly they treat lumber with different chemicals and formaldehydes to prevent fungal growth, but especially drywall and some dust and kind of an aged environment, a little bit of water damage or humidity, hey, fungus grows because mold spores are everywhere. You go walking through the woods, you're going to breathe in all sorts of fungal spores into your sinuses and whatnot. So that's again where it's not really a matter of if they've been exposed, but how resilient is their body. But you can imagine going through a walk through the woods, that's very different than you are in a closed off, airtight environment that is your home
Right.
for, the majority of all day, every day. And you're in close proximity to living, breathing. Fungus breathes oxygen just like we do and exhales CO2 just like we do. And it's there and it's emitting its different mycotoxins and bioaerosols that we're just breathing in all day.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's so crucial. And any environment that smells musty
Must
means
be.
that there's mold somewhere. And it doesn't even have to be a concentrated, like, oh yeah, visible mycelium growing on the wall, but just there is because mold doesn't have to be visible to be present and growing. I actually had some water damage in my bathroom over here back in February, and I could smell something weird about 2 to 3 months before I discovered a visible mycelium in the cabinetry.
Wow. Yeah. Well, then that makes sense that our basement does smell musty. So that's
Yeah,
probably, so is it a good idea to open your windows then, and like in the spring and the fall? Or is that bad, or would that
absolutely.
introduce mold in?
Well, I mean, certainly it's like when we open up to the external environment, sure, more mold spores could be traveling in, but I don't think there's any way around that really. So that's where, proper air filtration systems. But yeah, I think having that fresh airflow is huge to prevent excess humidity or, and controlling the humidity of the environment is important. But yeah, getting that fresh airflow is so crucial. Absolutely, we can't be sealing ourselves off in a kind of our toxic stew that we create in our homes.
So what test can somebody do that isn't going to turn their life upside down? Because mold can be, checking for mold and remediating it can be a total pain, and I call it that rabbit hole you can start creating, because I mean, obviously it's going to be there. So, and then the testing can be very expensive. So people who are listening, what would be a affordable way to check?
Yeah, so certainly this is where I think some of the mold information that floats around in our industry might be more fear-inducing than helpful at times, because you hear about like the horror stories of the clients or patients with severe mold illness, and they're just crippled and have SIRS and whatever it is. Um, but that's really not super common. And for every one severe case, there might be 10 to 20 kind of more subclinical cases where it's like, just a little bit of brain fog or a little bit of tummy issues. And so again, this is where we don't want to sensationalize or create fear around it. But if the environment smells musty and you don't feel, especially you feel it cognitively, generally a lot
Yeah.
of people, especially if they're more in tune with their body, they enter a musty environment, they might very quickly start feeling this kind of cognitive fog and dissonance a little bit. So to screen for mold in the environment, I think there are like cheap little petri dishes, just agar plates that you can set out. And if there's, excess mold in the environment and spores floating around, it'll land on the plate in culture. That's an easy, like preliminary screen. But if there was really a real concern about, ooh, we have a mold problem, that's where there's the ERMI or Hertz me testing, which is like an air sample or a actual sample of like dust and whatnot. They'll suck up some stuff to see, are there, fungal DNA. It's a PCR test to see
Oh,
the presence of DNA, bacteria, of fungi and candida and bacteria and whatnot.
so the symptoms typically are, if you, okay, my mother was like that. She was very mold sensitive, which now that goes into the question that I wanted to ask. Is there some people who are genetically susceptible to being sensitive? Could you have two people with two different genetics walk into a moldy home? One flares up completely and the other one's like, I don't notice anything.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot to be said for the genetics. I will say some of the information out there I think is a little convoluted. The common statistic is, oh, well, about 25% of the population has a HLA-DRDQ phenotype, which, increases their susceptibility to something like mold illness. Whether that's an accurate statistic or not, who knows? But if we kind of think through an evolutionary model of, let's say you had a tribe of hunter gatherers and they were living in a moldy environment, well, let's say there's 10 of them, 9 of them might feel totally fine, but one of them might get really ill really fast. And they're that canary in the coal mine. So that's where the genetics are an evolutionary benefit, an evolutionary advantage of, well, it sucks to be the canary, but at least you're kind of tipping off like, hey, everybody, this environment is not safe. Like the air quality is not safe. So we need to get out. So, nobody wants to be the canary, but from an evolutionary model, that served us, that helped us survive, because otherwise, it's like the frog in the boiling pot where it doesn't realize that it's being boiled alive until then you get really sick. So I used to live with a canary and she got wrecked, and that's how we knew that something was not right.
That's interesting. Is my fiance and I both, Terry, who's actually listening right now, he we both have candida overgrowth, and my symptoms are a lot worse than his. And I think I'm the canary. I'm like, you should be glad I found out we have it. If it
Hmm.
wasn't for me, you wouldn't know you had it. Because the symptoms for him are more subtle. They're not,
Right.
like right in front of your face, debilitating. It might be a little brain fog, maybe a little bit of chronic fatigue, but it isn't like with me, it's like completely debilitating. So being a canary sometimes is actually a good thing because it forces you to look at your environment to see if there's a problem. Because otherwise, other people who don't have symptoms, the damage is still happening in their body.
Yeah,
It doesn't mean they're immune to the damage. It's still
exactly.
happening. So,
Yeah, I
okay.
lived in a kind of previous life. I was living with an ex-fiance and her three children, and I didn't know anything about mold at the time. I was personal trainer and nutritionist, but she was the canary. She got extremely ill. But we all had some weird symptoms going on. Her son had more brain fog and kind of ADD exacerbation, sinusitis, allergy type symptoms. I had severe fatigue and it really flared up my depression. Her two daughters kind of seemed unaffected, but then she was the canary. So, it could everybody in the same environment, but everybody affected a little differently.
Those of you listening, I want you to hear what he just said because I have so many people who are like, what protocol should I follow on the Facebook page? They just want generalized protocols. And I tell them, I can't give that to you because you are a unique butterfly and everybody is expressing the disease differently. And it's so true. If I took 10 lab reports and stacked them next to each other, I can say each one has their own unique circumstances and their own unique expression. So it's, you just said, same environment, even four people from the same genetic background, they're related to each
Mhm.
other, mom and the kids, different expression. Same here. My son, who's exposed to our environment, which I believe probably does have mold, he had the sinus stuff. And that's how
Mhm.
I found out that I had to test him because I was like, this isn't normal. His sinus things is really, I don't have sinus issues. My daughter doesn't. So I'm like, well, what's going on? Well, it was the mold. He happened to be the canary too, which it's, and my expression is different. His is through the sinuses, mine's through bladder.
Mhm.
You see how different that is?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. The systems of the body can be very different and it'll manifest, which is part of why it makes it so hard for practitioners to be able to navigate is you could be looking at a mold case, but you're thinking it's a gut case or a neurotransmitter case or whatever it is, it can affect all systems of the body.
definitely. So, okay, so now that we know, let's say somebody has done the testing, they found out okay, so let's go to lab tests first before we talk about the actual home testing, because some people may not have symptoms that's going to initiate them to go get the ERMI test, for example. So let's say you're concerned that your autoimmune issues are related to mold. What labs do you typically recommend or run for this particular situation to identify that mold is playing a part?
Yeah, so I always, every client, no matter who they are, I'm always just starting with good old fashioned blood work and a really thorough intake. And, I can generally tell just from the symptoms and health complaints, the history, and some different blood markers of is it on the table. But if I have reason to believe based on the consultation, based on the intake, I think that mold might be something that's present, whether because I asked them, have you ever lived in a water damaged building, or we knew that there was exposure, or the symptomology is just so reminiscent of mold, the cognitive dissonance, the GI issues, the chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, ice pick pain. It can be so widespread. But if it kind of seems like it might be mold, the two tests that I would immediately recommend would be an organic acid test and then probably a urinary mycotoxin test, which is not as helpful as you would want it to be, but it is still good to get a gauge on the mycotoxins being excreted. But to your point before, you could have five people, each one did a mycotoxin test. You could literally have one person, no symptoms, with extremely high levels of mycotoxins on their test, another person with low levels of mycotoxins, but their symptoms are through the roof, and kind of everything in between. So that test isn't very good at representing how well their body's dealing with the toxins. It's just a screening test of, well, hey, if you have a lot of mycotoxins coming out of your body in the urine, you got exposure somewhere. So it's just kind of that screen to see, have you been exposed? And then the organic acid test is a better reflection to see, one, because I think it's important to distinguish of, you could have exposure, but then step two is colonization. Is the mold overgrowing inside of you? And then step three is the toxins, because you could have kind of any combination of, you could have somebody that they've been exposed, mold is growing in their body and they're toxic. But you could also have somebody that they've been exposed, but the mold isn't growing inside of them. They don't have like a fungal overgrowth or fungal infection, but they do have an excess of the toxins accumulated. So that's what we call mycotoxicosis. So the organic acid test is going to be helpful for screening for, do you have mold overgrowth inside of your body, and how is that affecting your biochemistry? Because we can look at all these other patterns like the oxalates that you're big on, or the mitochondrial function neurotransmitters, to see how severe that mold is actually affecting your physiology, which also correlates with the blood work too. So unfortunately, it's not as easy as practitioners like it to be of, well, just run the mycotoxin test and boom, you have your roadmap to success. But I think, blood work as like the foundational panel everybody should do.
Absolutely.
But then
The right ones, not the CMP. We're done.
Yeah, a little bit more than that, because how conventional medicine loves to leave off some of the best markers, but the organic acid test and mycotoxin combination, I think, is a very powerful way to assess for, is this a mold case, and provide us some direction with that.
So if I am hearing you correctly, you can either have it colonized in your gut, or in your body, I guess primarily gut with the organic acid test, and that would show up as those aspergillus and the other mold marker, mycotoxin markers. But if you do urinary mycotoxin and it's not showing up on the gut, the OAT, then are you excreting it internally, or is it coming from the externally in that case? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It can get a little bit tricky because sometimes you might see like a mold pattern on page like 2, 3, 4 of the OAT test, even if page 1 is negative. Sometimes that might mean you're toxic, but you don't have fungal overgrowth. Other times it might be you have fungus starting to grow. It just hasn't really reared its ugly head yet, and it hasn't grown enough to have high levels of those organic acid metabolites.
Gotcha.
So this is also where a lot of times when I'm consulting with people, we might also do like a fungal antibody test. You can do Aspergillus IgG or Penicillium IgG through LabCorp Quest. But part of the problem, with testing, we don't have any perfect test, because like with organic acids, some of those markers are pretty specific to Aspergillus or maybe Fusarium, but we don't have a marker for Penicillium or Bipolaris or Stachybotrys or some of these other species of mold. So that's part of it, is you might have some other species that we don't really have a marker for. But that's where like the mycotoxin test can be helpful, because let's say you have a toxin that's produced by black mold, but we don't have a marker for black mold on the OAT test. So, well, we know you've been exposed to black mold. Mm-hmm. So it becomes kind of this art of, regardless of what mycotoxins do you have, are they actually hurting your body, which you should see reflected in the blood work, but also, do you have a fungal infection? Because if there is fungal overgrowth or an infection of fungi, that has to be dealt with before we worry about the toxins, because otherwise it's like trying to drain water out of a sinking ship, or you got to plug the hole first. You got to kill off the overgrowth of fungus before you can really detoxify the body.
I say that all the time about heavy metals. If you have a fungal overgrowth and you have heavy metals, you can go ahead and keep doing all those antifungals. But as long as you have the heavy metals, they ain't going anywhere. And that's because the candida especially is protecting you from the metals. As long as you have the metals, you're going to have the candida. And so it's the same idea. You have to get rid of, so you're saying you have to get rid of what you have colonized, which usually shows up on the oat before you can worry about the metabolites that are showing up on the urine test.
Yeah, it's kind of like if you're trying to do a mercury detox protocol, but you haven't had the amalgams removed yet. It's like, well, you're just breathing it in. So
That's
get
a
those
difficult
out.
conversation to have with people who have like 6 or 7 of them, because
Ooh,
it's hard. I mean, I got rid of all mine. I had 6 and 7, but I got
right.
rid of all of mine, one by one, because it's a very expensive procedure, and you have to do it with the biological dentist, because otherwise
Right.
you're going to reabsorb some of that. So,
Mm-hmm.
all right, well, that takes me to that next question then. So you find out you have mold exposure, you have colonization in the gut, and you do also show up on the urine test for some of those metabolites. So what does a person do after that?
Yeah, so that step one of getting away from the exposure. So if they're living in a water damaged home, that's step one. Either get out, remediate it, whatever you got to do. The dietary exposure isn't generally the thing that really made somebody sick. I mean, it's possible, or it could be a contributor, but it's generally not the primary issue. Because, like, every time you eat organic blueberries, well, if it's organic, they didn't spray the crops with fungicides, which makes it more prone to develop, or how many times do you leave berries in your fridge overnight and then you go check the next morning and mold grew on them? It's like, well, so eating mold spores is just part of being human, but it doesn't mean it's going to grow inside of you. And that's where, if we have a healthy microbiome and immune system, we shouldn't develop that overgrowth. So once we've dealt with exposure and avoiding exposure, get out of the moldy environment, whatever the case is, yeah, step two is deal with the fungal overgrowth with antifungal drugs and or supplements with some other supportive therapeutics to just mitigate some of the toxic damage. And then step three is going to be working on the detoxification, which can't be rushed. You have some people that are really toxic and they're like, oh, I'm going to do a coffee enema because I hear that really helps. That could send them into a horrible detox reaction. So it's like we want to kind of drain that tank slowly but surely over time. And it can take a while to do that detoxification process.
How long typically for most people from what you've seen?
The hard thing is like the urinary mycotox, and there's also blood mycotoxin tests. But either way, there's no real way of knowing how full that tank of toxin is. We don't have a way of really assessing the body burden. There are some blood markers that I like to use to kind of track the inflammatory reaction to the toxins. And it's like, okay, if these markers are moving in the right direction, that's a good sign. But for example, you could do a mycotoxin test to start and your toxin levels are here, and then do a 12-week detox protocol and then your toxin levels are here. And people are like, oh my gosh, it got worse. And it's like, well, maybe you're just excreting more of it. You're liberating those toxins from the storage tank, right? The fat, the storage, whatever. And now we just see more of them coming out of your body. That's a good thing. But so that's kind of how I gauge progress, is over time we should see the blood markers moving in the right direction, the symptoms are going down, and eventually you should get a negative mycotoxin test. So when I see like a negative mycotoxin, they don't have symptoms, their blood work looks great. Okay, I think I think our work is done. But for more severe cases, I would say it's like at least a year of work and diligent work on their health. And for more mild cases, it can be more like a 6-month type of process.
Gotcha. So binders that are effective and risky. I know that I had a client who was on cholestyramine for a year, and now she's got really bad gut issues, really bad. And I'm wondering if it's related, because it might have been binding the important minerals like zinc, which you need for hydrochloric acid production. So, and I know it also can bind to, bile and, reduce your cholesterol, which can be good if you have high cholesterol, but, you do need cholesterol for steroid hormone production. So, I wonder about that. And I'm not sure, what your thoughts are on long-term binders, especially for a year.
Yeah. Generally, I think non-prescription binders are pretty safe long term, and I think I'm a huge fan of non-prescription binders. Like, activated charcoal, or even just different types of fiber.
Feel like, yeah.
Like there's a reason why dietitians always recommend more fiber to lower cholesterol, because it binds. But activated charcoal, zeolite clay, bentonite, apple pectin, humic fulvic acid, even different probiotics or things like Saccharomyces boulardii can help with binding toxins. Or I love the serum bovine immunoglobulins, amazing for so many
Oh, you mean like
things.
Mega IgG 2000?
Yeah,
Oh, every
yeah.
one of my protocols use,
Oh,
every one of my patients use
it's
that.
magic,
Yeah,
straight magic.
love it.
So
I take it
many.
with meals every time I eat.
Yeah, I do too. Just
Yeah.
one capsule with a meal prophylactically,
Oh,
whereas
I do
like
4. I do 4.
that's cool too, because there's no upper dose and it'll
Yeah.
just get digested as protein. But with like IBD or gut issues, yeah, I'll have them taking like 9 to 12 capsules of that per day, and it works so well. But the non-prescription binders, I think, are pretty safe long term. I like to alternate and take, maybe one night on, one night off, just for general maintenance. But the prescription binders, like you said, cholestyramine, Welchol, those are really, really powerful, which can move the needle very quickly in severe mold cases. It could make somebody feel way better very quickly or way worse very quickly. So it's just powerful. But like you said, I don't think we want to use those prescription binders more than necessary or long term, because, yeah, it can pull out too much bile, pull out too much cholesterol, nutrients, whatever it is. So those are good options for like more short term kind of mold detoxification. But not everybody, it becomes a game of titration because it's just so powerful. But the non-prescription binders are pretty safe longer term, and
Okay.
can be used as kind of a general maintenance.
Well, Jeff is on our page, and he is the GlycoLife guy. And
Mhm.
I did an interview with him, and we use his Zeo Boost all the time.
Yeah.
It is a really good product, and actually is, from what I understand, it's better than the spray. And it's, I know he does his homework before he sells things, because he's really particular about his ingredients. And that's what all my patients are using is the Zeo Boost. I use it myself. I do maintenance. I'm doing 3 teaspoons a day, but if I'm actively detoxing right now, I'm doing 6 teaspoons. So 3 teaspoons twice a day. And I mix the Ultra Binder from Quicksilver in it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a nice little concoction. And
Yeah.
Pectosol C sometimes.
Yeah. See, I think there's a lot of benefit from kind of a variety of binders, because different binders will bind different toxins differently. So I think variety is good, and I like to rotate them a little bit as well, because beyond mycotoxins, there's a lot of other things we want to bind: the metals, the endotoxins, the glyphosate, the whatever it is. So yeah, I really like to use a variety of binders with just for general maintenance. People today are so toxic, so I think it's really helpful.
Cool. All right. So we're on the right track with that. And so now into the oxalates. I love my oxalates.
Yeah.
How do oxalates, and I know, remember with the oat training, you had mentioned that mold produce oxalates as part of their microbiome, correct?
Yeah, some people even kind of consider oxalates as like maybe that is kind of a mycotoxin in a way. And I think there's a lot more we need to learn about oxalates. And one of my friends is kind of digging into some of that research. But there is the genetic hyperoxaluria diseases, or people that have a history of kidney stones, or fibromyalgia. So oxalates are interesting, but just like everything else, we don't want to freak people out, because like I don't use a low oxalate diet super regularly, because most people are not eating nearly enough plant food. And so you kind of start teaching them that, like, oh gosh, you can't eat spinach because it's super high in oxalates. And it's like, well, I don't think too many people need to be worried about that. But especially on the oat test, when I see high oxalic acid, I am first and foremost taking that as a clue towards mold, because yeah, mold produces oxalic acid directly. So you might see in the forest, you might see a crystal shelf of oxalate crystallization that's growing off of a fungi, mycelium. And so the fungus growing inside of us will produce oxalic acid endogenously, and then yeast like Candida can contribute indirectly. It's kind of a little biochemical pathway trick, but it can contribute to excess oxalates. And then, of course, it's a matter of, well, how well is our body or our microbiome metabolizing and getting rid of that oxalic acid or whatever out of the body versus how much of that is maybe absorbing and, kind of leaky gut, or there's not enough oxalobacter formigenes or whatever it is.
Or vitamin B6.
Yeah. And then they might develop some of that like crystal deposits throughout their body, causing that pain or vulvodynia or kidney stones or whatever it is.
I can tell you firsthand, when oxalates pass through the urinary tract, it's passing through it because it feels like glass.
Yeah.
That's what it feels like. And I am now learning that oxalates do contribute to UTIs because of the microbiome of the oxalate. Because I know I've done a lot of Susan Owens reading, and I've been on her page for 10 years. So I've been there for a while. And it's funny, the story with me is funny. I actually found her 10 years ago. And when I first was finding out about the oxalate diet, I left the group because I was like, this is too much. I can't handle this. Like, you're telling me I got to stop eating these things that I love. I'm done. So I left. And then when I started re-looking at oxalates again with IC, I went back and I said, okay, let me be a little bit more open-minded about this. And so now I'm learning about, the connection to oxalates and just everything in general, like activating the inflammasome. And, but I agree with you. I don't think it's all dietary, because I even learned in biochem that I just finished this semester that protein, glycine, has a metabolic pathway, biochemical pathway to oxalates. Glycine, and that's found in meat because it's essential amino acids. So, if you're eating I know a lot of people love that carnivore diet, but I don't know about the carnivore diet because I feel like that's messing with your microbiome, first of all. And second of all, what about all those amino acids? They got to go somewhere, and you got to make sure your urea cycle has to be healthy in order to be able to detox all that. And you have all that ammonia, which is toxic by itself, so I do think there's a link, and I do think that there's more to it than just your diet. And I agree with you. I'm not as strict about the low oxalate diet. I'm not sit there and calculate everything and you have to stay under 50 grams or milligrams. I don't do that. I tell people everyone has their tipping points. My tipping point might be 150. In the TLO group, they might think that's too much, but I feel good. I don't have any IC symptoms. I feel great. I'm looking healthier. My hair is fuller. My thyroid is getting healed. 150 works for me.
Yeah, you're exactly right. It's that, the biochemical individuality, because glycine, vitamin C, collagen, how much of the oxalobacter bacteria in our gut is breaking it down, how much is getting so if we had like a typical, let's say, American dude that has high uric acid on their blood work, high oxalic acid on their organic acid, they have a history of kidney stones, and they're drinking spinach juice every day, I think we have an oxalate problem. But to your point though, and this is where I like to kind of zoom out of okay, well, I don't think there's any plant or animal that was perfectly designed to just be the perfect fuel source for our physiology. I think there's going to be all sorts of constituents of the plants and the phytonutrients that, some people might have a problem with it, others not. So oxalates and salicylates and histamine. So yeah, this is exactly where that kind of biochemical individuality, and it takes a knowledgeable practitioner like yourself to navigate that stuff.
Thank you. And there's that heavy metal. I remember I had posted on your Facebook page, I had said, I had done a heavy metal detox, was pretty intense, using some chelating agents. And then I was just I wanted to hit it really hard. So I was I'm just going to do this. And of course it promoted oxalate dumping. And now I realize that they bind to minerals, to heavy metals as well. Mm-hmm. And that might explain, so as someone who's got a heavy metal issue, you got to be careful when you're trying to remove oxalates. You got to go real slow, because that homeostasis of the body, once the body senses less oxalates coming in, you're going to dump. Your body's going to have to try to achieve homeostasis and in equilibrium. And that's what happened to me. And I started noticing all these oxalates. I can actually literally see them in the toilets when I go to the bathroom. I see them. The urine gets cloudy. And then within days, I get a UTI. Yeah. It causes a UTI.
It does. Yeah. Recurrent UTI is very classic oxalate symptom.
You guys hear that? He said recurrent UTIs. Almost everyone here on this page has some level of recurrent
Mm-hmm.
UTIs.
Mm-hmm.
That can be an oxalate issue. It can be a mold issue. It can be a heavy metal issue. You have to test, don't guess.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I always tell people.
Yep. Yeah, and that's where that oat test is a very cost-effective screening tool for all this kind of stuff, because it's like, is it fungus? Is it a detox? Is it oxalate? But it's kind of all the above, like you said. And you got the microbes and the biofilm, and it's like you might have oxalates binding to metals in the biofilm. You know what I mean? So it's just like, oh my gosh, it's like it just becomes this toxic stew that we might be dealing with.
Since I did your training, that's pretty much what I do now with every single person that walks in the door is an oat test. And I do HTMA also, and I do blood. Those are my triple. And everything else, I kind of stopped. I haven't been doing GI maps. I haven't been doing genetics. I really haven't been doing genetics. As much as I love genetics, I just haven't been, because I feel like it's like you have genetics, but they haven't been expressed. So why should I scare you and tell you have MTHFR or you have this and that, which is not showing up on any other labs? So I really just stick to those three.
Yeah.
Those are my big three. And the OAT test was really, really pivotal for my practice. So, and the training was really helpful. So let me ask last question here, mast cells. A lot of people listening in IC is a mast cell disorder. We know this because a lot of the urology journals talk about mast cell activation in the bladder. They can measure this, so that they actually, the bladder wall actually has this overactivation of mast cells. And there's histamine intolerance. A lot of people have histamine intolerance as well, which is a gut issue. So can you explain the connection to mold, mycotoxins, and mast cell activation?
Yeah, mast cells are interesting. So, we have on just our standard blood work, we can look at the basophils and the whole blood histamine, which, basophils is just going to be on any good old, CBC.
We have,
but then with whole blood histamine, we can measure that as well to assess kind of the total body histamine load. So basophils are these, kind of big balloons of kind of this pro-inflammatory histamine and heparin and serotonin. And so when the basophil migrates into a target tissue, whatever that is, the bladder, anything else, it becomes this mast cell. And so I don't know that we necessarily fully understand why, but we definitely see, like with Lyme disease and stealth infections, and then with mold and mycotoxins, for whatever reason, those conditions, those situations seem to have this really heightened basophilia and mast cell activation syndrome. And so these are the people where, those with because like histamine intolerance and histamine symptoms are kind of easy to spot. They got the rosacea and the flushing and the allergy and the prickly and the hives and the cognitive, so there's that side of it. But the mast cell people are just so reactive. I mean, sometimes they can't even, drink something or eat something without immediately having that kind of histaminergic flare up. And it's thought to be this overexpression of this mast cell activation syndrome. I think we have a lot more to learn about it. I do kind of feel like it's a little bit of like the diagnosis of the month in our industry. But yes, there's something to it. And I simply look at it as, okay, well, while we're, working on that root cause or root causes, how can we calm down that mast cell storm and activity? And so that's where I think some of those, mast cell stabilizers and antihistamine nutraceuticals or botanicals can be really helpful. So the quercetin, the nettle, I really like to use I like botanicals, but quercetin, nettle, I don't know that I see the same relief. You could use something like an over-the-counter Claritin or loratadine, which is just going to block the histamine receptors, but that doesn't do anything to lower the histamine load. So that's where I really like diamine oxidase, which you can do as a supplement. I live on that stuff during allergy season. So I love that, the diamine oxidase, but also, histamine gets broken down numerous ways. Extracellularly, it's the DAO, which will be released by those microvilli in the gut, but also released by eosinophils. So that's why a lot of times if you have somebody with mast cells or allergy symptoms, they might have a high eosinophil count on their blood work. And that's not parasites, that's antihistamine activity. But intracellularly, histamine's broken down through a methylation reaction. So that's also where some of our B vitamins and methylation support can help too. So I think with those mast cell super reactive people, sometimes you do have to calm down that histaminergic reaction before you can, start dropping antifungal bombs or whatever. So I like to do, put the binders in, and whether it's charcoal or immunoglobulins or both, maybe give some DAO and some, quercetin if you want, some probiotics, some methyl support. Try to remove, any intolerances that are just sparking up that histamine storm, or maybe reducing histamine load through the diet. And once you have them a little bit more stable, then you can start kind of chipping away a little more hardcore at like the antimicrobials or whatever the case is. But it's such a bio-individualized kind of, and sometimes day by day, right?
Yeah, I mean, just the glycolytic pathway alone has so many nutrients that I see are deficient, like the B's, like you said, the B's, B6, always, every single person who's done an oat has zero B6. And B6 is, I'm reading this journal right now that talks about all the various mechanisms of B6. It's beyond what we thought. And it's not just neurotransmitters, but also the glycolytic pathway, and even involved a little bit of methylation. And so that alone, I think, is going to help with the cellular balancing. And what I'm talking about is ATP production, because if your body's not producing, if you're not producing ATP, guarantee, or downregulated, you're going to have all these other problems down the road. So like even just supporting the mitochondria and mitochondrial support through what you just said, and just look at the glycolytic pathway and look at all the different nutrients that are involved, and make sure that they're getting all those proper nutrients. And also, what are their symptoms? A lot of them are reactive hypoglycemics. Mm-hmm. Many of my people that I work with are reactive hypoglycemics, and that tells me there's something blocked in those pathways. And so I just sometimes just tell people foundationally, let's just go all the way back and let's focus on that and getting your mitochondria, your energy production, so that you can feel good, that you can exercise. Because if you're fatigued, you're not going to exercise. If you're not exercising, you're not going to detox. And if you're not detoxing, you're going to, you have all these problems with the mycotoxins. So yeah, I mean, there's so much involved. And if you guys are listening, you have to understand it's complicated. It's not something you should be doing by yourself. Like I tried for years to try to figure and navigate by myself. And I'm telling you right now, you're going to feel like a hamster running in a wheel. You got to work with people who, this is what we study. I mean, I've seen your Instagram posts and how you're like constantly educating yourself. That's all you do all day.
Yeah. I like to just, sit and learn and practice and get better and better. And, I think one of the important takeaways for anybody listening too is I think the best thing they can do is consistently and diligently implement the fundamentals, because the stuff we're talking about, it is very complicated, but none of that, I don't want to say none of it matters, but it doesn't matter that much if the fundamentals are not in place. So the best thing that, they can be doing is, consistently and diligently reducing stress, doing that sleep hygiene, exercising appropriately, eating that healthy diet. The consistency helps control the variables. So that way, when we are trying to put in some sort of specific intervention, the variables are controlled enough that if something, freaks out and we have a weird reaction, we can try to work backwards and figure it out. But yeah, it's like 80% of the equation are those fundamentals that are not sexy, but they're so crucial. But also being so in tune with the body, the body will let you know, should I go work out really hard right now? Or should I go for a gentle nature walk? Should I go to bed right now? So the more that they can be in tune with their body, it makes it easier for us, because we're trying to navigate all these complicated nuances. So that way we're being snipers, not a shotgun. And we don't have, let's run $3,000 of lab testing. Let's have you take 30 supplements. We don't want to do that. We want to make it easier for you guys but they have to make it easy for us as the
Exactly.
providers too. So
It's a partnership. It
yeah,
definitely.
it's a give and take.
Well, thank you so much. This was a really amazing interview. And I'm glad that we're doing this because, like I said, I think a lot of people are listening. And I know right now it's an odd time for a lot of people because they're working. So this will be on Facebook. You guys can watch it. I'm going to probably post it on IGTV, and I'm also going to post it on my YouTube page. So you guys can visit those. And how can they reach you if they want to, you have a Facebook page you can share or anything?
Yeah, so I'm not too hard to find on the internet. The Instagram, which is fun, that's the Holistic Savage. But then Facebook, it's Metabolic Solutions LLC, and our website, metabolicsolutionsllc.com. But yeah, I have a lot of fun with this conversation. It's not as often I get to get into some of the technical stuff, which is so fun and so cool. So I really appreciate you creating this platform and space for us to share some, hopefully, educational and empowering information.
And that's what we're here for. We're here to educate everybody. So I really appreciate you, and we'll be in touch soon. And thank you for being here. And we'll talk shortly.
That sounds great. Thanks so much, Mandy. Have a great
Thanks.
day.
You too. Bye bye.
Bye.